The chandeliers of the Grand Astoria Hotel glittered like frozen stars above a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. It was the annual New York Education Gala, an evening meant to celebrate charity and pour millions into initiatives that promised brighter futures for underprivileged children. Yet for Olivia Hart, standing at the edge of the marble stage with trembling hands, clutching her worn leather portfolio, it felt less like celebration and more like trial by fire. She was 26, a public school teacher who worked 2 jobs to afford her small apartment in Queens. Tonight she had been given 3 precious minutes to speak before the wealthiest people in the city. She had rehearsed every line, every plea for the children she taught, who came to school hungry, who wore the same shoes until the soles split. She believed in her cause with every fiber of her being. But belief was not armor. The crowd before her was a wall of gleaming jewels, raised eyebrows, and polite boredom. When the moderator announced her name and invited her forward, she stepped into the spotlight, aware of how modest her navy dress appeared. Beside gowns worth more than her annual salary, her voice began steady. She spoke of classrooms with leaking ceilings of students who read by the flicker of a hallway bulb. She spoke of potential of bright eyes dulled by poverty of futures that could be rewritten if only someone cared enough to help. A hush fell, not reverent but skeptical. Then from the center table near the front, a voice rang out. A man with silver hair and a glass of champagne smirked as he interrupted. "Tell me, Miss Hart, do you truly think anyone here will take you seriously dressed like that? That bargain store dress might inspire pity, but it hardly inspires confidence." The laughter that followed rolled across the hall like a cruel tide. Olivia froze. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she lifted her chin. She would not cry in front of them. She would not retreat. "I came here to talk about my students," she answered, her tone sharper than steel. "Not my dress." The man shrugged, dismissive, already turning back to his companions. The room buzzed with whispers. Olivia gripped the edge of the podium. Every instinct screamed at her to walk off, but she forced herself to stand tall. "I am not here for your approval," she said louder now, her voice carrying. "I am not like other women you meet at galas. I am here for my students." The words sliced through the noise, silencing the laughter. Heads turned, phones lifted discreetly, recording. For a heartbeat, she stood alone, defiant, against an ocean of doubt. And then another voice joined, smooth, deep, and commanding enough to still the air itself. "That is why I want you." Gasps rippled through the audience. Olivia's eyes flew toward the source. At the far side of the ballroom, a tall man had risen from his seat. Ethan Blackwell. She knew the name, everyone did. The 34-year-old billionaire CEO of Blackwell Capital, a man the press called the Shark of Wall Street, stood with effortless authority. His charcoal suit fit like a second skin, his posture straight, his green eyes fixed entirely on her. He walked forward slowly, each step deliberate, and the crowd parted as though the marble floor itself yielded to his command. Whispers swirled like storm winds. Was he mocking her? Was this spectacle planned? Olivia's pulse hammered, unsure whether to feel rescued or ambushed. When he reached the foot of the stage, he looked up at her with the faintest curve of amusement touching his lips. She had seen pictures of him in magazines, surrounded by models, by power brokers, always untouchable. But tonight, his gaze was locked only on her, as though no one else existed in the glittering hall. "You said you are not like other women," he spoke evenly, "and I believe you. That is exactly what makes you worth listening to. Olivia's breath caught. The man who was famous for cutting deals without mercy, who had built an empire by caring only for profit, was defending her. For the first time that evening, the laughter did not return. Instead, silence hung heavy, curious, expectant. Ethan inclined his head slightly, as if offering her the floor again, as if lending her his reputation, his shield. The chandeliers shimmered above them, but Olivia hardly noticed. She gripped the podium tighter, her resolve blazing brighter than her fear. This was not how she imagined her 3 minutes would go, but perhaps she thought it was how it was meant to begin. Olivia Hart left the gala that night, with her heart pounding her mind, torn between humiliation and the strange sense of vindication that Ethan Blackwell's words had provided. The billionaire's voice had echoed in her ears all the way back to Queens, where her modest apartment sat above a laundromat that never seemed to sleep. She set her portfolio down on the worn coffee table and stared out of the window at the flicker of neon signs. She knew who Ethan was, knew his reputation, knew that he was not the kind of man who ever noticed someone like her. Yet he had spoken in front of hundreds as though she mattered. Still, she refused to allow herself the indulgence of hope. Olivia was not someone who dreamed about men in penthouses. She was someone who woke up at 5 to grade papers, who stayed late in classrooms with broken heaters, who bought pencils with her own money. That was her reality, and she would not trade it for all the diamonds glittering in the ballroom she had just left. Ethan, meanwhile, returned to his glass fortress overlooking Central Park, a penthouse that stretched across 2 entire floors, its windows opening onto a skyline that seemed to belong only to him. He loosened his tie, poured a drink of scotch older than Olivia, and stared into the city lights. People called him ruthless. They said he had ice instead of blood, that he was incapable of caring for anything beyond the next acquisition. He let them think so because it served him. Yet tonight, as he watched the brave young woman in the navy dress stand her ground, he had felt something stir, something inconvenient and unfamiliar. He told himself it was curiosity, nothing more. He told himself he would forget her by morning. But he knew he was lying. Olivia's background was nothing like Ethan's. She had grown up in a small town in Pennsylvania, the daughter of a mechanic and a nurse. They had given her love, but not wealth, and when a car accident claimed them both during her freshman year of college, she had been left with nothing but grief and determination. Scholarships and part-time jobs had carried her through her education degree. By 23, she was teaching in the Bronx, pouring herself into lesson plans and after-school tutoring. Her students loved her because she believed in them when few others did. Yet love did not pay the bills, and Olivia often came home exhausted, wondering how long she could keep going on sheer willpower alone. Ethan's story was legend in business circles. Born to a working-class family in Chicago, he had clawed his way into Ivy League halls through intellect and relentless drive. By 30, he had founded Blackwell Capital, and by 34, he was one of the richest men in America. But success came at the cost of loneliness. He had been engaged once to a woman from Philadelphia, whose father courted Ethan's investments. When the glamour of his world gave way to the grueling reality of his long hours and cold pragmatism, she left. Since then, he had sworn off vulnerability. He was a shark, and sharks did not fall in love. The contrast between Olivia and Ethan could not have been sharper. She lived paycheck to paycheck, saving pennies to buy supplies for her classroom. He signed contracts worth billions before lunch. She worried about subway delays. He traveled by helicopter. She ate takeout on nights she could not cook. He dined in Michelin star restaurants without even glancing at the menu. Yet fate had pushed them into the same room, and something in that collision had cracked the armor around Ethan's heart. The city itself reflected their differences. New York was a paradox of opulence and struggle skyscrapers, rising above neighborhoods where children played in cracked playgrounds. Olivia belonged to the latter world, Ethan to the former, and yet the same streets carried them both each day. On Sunday mornings, she walked to the corner store for groceries, nodding at neighbors who all knew her name. Ethan, on the rare occasions he left his tower without security, was met with the careful stares of those who both feared and envied him. Their realities were so far apart that even a glance across a ballroom should have been impossible. And yet Olivia could not shake the memory of his words. "That is why I want you." They haunted her as she graded spelling tests, as she listened to a student describe how his family had been evicted, as she stretched every dollar to buy paint for a classroom mural. Why had he said it? What could he possibly have meant? Ethan asked himself the same question as he stared into the city night. Why had he defended her? What did it matter if a teacher embarrassed herself before a crowd of elites? But her voice had been fierce, her courage unshakable, and it had reminded him of something he had buried long ago. Once before the billions, before the headlines, he had been the boy no one expected to rise, the boy who had to fight for every chance. He saw that same fire in her, and he knew he could not look away. Both carried scars invisible to the public. Olivia's were carved by loss and sacrifice. Ethan's were carved by betrayal and ambition. Neither trusted easily, both guarded themselves fiercely, and yet destiny had already written the first lines of a story that neither of them expected. Their paths were about to cross again, and when they did, the collision would shake more than a ballroom. It would test power, pride, vulnerability, and the very meaning of love in a world where money was worshipped above all else. The gala became gossip fodder the next morning. Social media replayed the clip of Olivia's defiant words and Ethan's startling declaration. Some called it romantic, others called it a publicity stunt. But Olivia ignored it all. She had lessons to prepare students to meet and rent due at the end of the month. She woke before dawn, rode the subway with her portfolio tucked against her side, and tried not to think of emerald green eyes watching her from across a ballroom. She assumed she would never see him again. But New York had other plans. A week later, Olivia found herself in the lobby of Blackwell Capital Nerves, jangling as she clutched a folder of proposals. Her school had urged her to seek private funding, and though every instinct told her that approaching Ethan Blackwell was futile desperation overrode pride, she told herself it was not about him. It was about the children who needed computers, textbooks, and after-school programs. She wore her best blazer, though the fabric had thinned at the elbows, and she rehearsed her speech in the elevator. When the doors slid open on the top floor, the air itself seemed sharper, colder, charged with power. His office stretched across half the building glass walls, framing the city as though he owned it. He stood at the window, tall and composed a silhouette against steel and sky. She cleared her throat. "Mr. Blackwell, thank you for agreeing to see me." He turned, eyes cool expression unreadable. "Miss Hart." His voice carried no trace of the warmth she remembered from the gala. She explained her project, the scholarship program. She hoped to build the reading centers she dreamed of opening. She spoke of children who had potential but no resources of futures that could change if someone cared enough to invest. Her words were careful, professional, yet her passion burned through every sentence. Ethan listened without interruption, then set down his pen. No. The rejection was flat, merciless, like a gavel striking. Olivia blinked. "No, just like that. We are not a charity, Miss Hart," he said. "My business is profit, not sentiment. If you want to change the world, you will need more than dreams and speeches." His words cut deeper than the laughter at the gala, because for one fleeting moment, she had believed he was different. She gathered her folder, forced herself to meet his gaze. "I thought perhaps you meant what you said, that I was worth listening to." He did not flinch. That night was theater, nothing more. "For you it may have been personal, but for me it was a moment. Do not confuse them." Humiliation threatened to swallow her, but anger held her upright. She straightened, her voice steady. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Blackwell. I will find another way." She walked out, refusing to let him see her falter. When the door closed behind her, Ethan remained frozen, by the window, jaw clenched. He had lied. It was not theater. It had never been theater. He had meant every word, and that was precisely why he had to push her away. Attachment was dangerous. Caring was weakness. Yet her eyes, steady and wounded, lingered in his thoughts long after she was gone. Olivia returned to her classroom determined to forget him. She poured herself into her students, creating makeshift projects with cardboard and markers when she could not afford supplies. She told herself she did not need billionaires or their hollow promises. But whispers traveled. The gala clip still circulated online, and her confrontation with Ethan became part of the narrative. Parents asked about it. Colleagues teased gently. Students asked if she really had stood up to a man worth billions. She laughed it off, but inside she wrestled with disappointment. Across town, Ethan faced questions of his own. At board meetings, his advisors hinted that his public image needed softening. Investors muttered about the coldness of his brand. The gala had given them a glimpse of something human, and they wanted more. A rival CEO, Reeves Carter, seized the moment, mocking Ethan in interviews as a machine without heart. The market listened. Public perception mattered more than Ethan wished to admit. When his communications director suggested a partnership with community programs to repair his image, one name surfaced repeatedly: Olivia Hart, the teacher who had dared to stand in the lion's den and speak her truth, the teacher who had captured headlines with authenticity rather than calculation. Ethan resisted, but pressure mounted. Finally, he relented, not out of choice but necessity. A week later, Olivia received a letter on thick cream paper, embossed with the Blackwell Capital seal. She read it twice, hardly believing the words. Invitation to collaborate on a new community initiative. Her first instinct was to tear it up. Yet the needs of her students outweighed her pride. She found herself again in his office, the city stretching wide behind him, his gaze steady as he said, "Miss Hart, it seems we are to work together." She folded her arms, suspicion sharpening her tone. "Against my will, perhaps, Against mine as well, he admitted. But appearances must be maintained. He gestured to a contract on the table, a scholarship fund, joint press conferences, public site visits, on paper a partnership, in reality a collision waiting to happen. Olivia felt the weight of choice pressing on her. Pride told her to walk out. Duty to her students forced her to stay. She picked up the pen. "Very well, Mr. Blackwell, but make no mistake. I am not here for you. I am here for them." Something flickered in his eyes, something almost like respect. "Then let us begin," he said. Their hands brushed briefly as she handed the signed paper back. The touch was electric uninvited, and it unsettled them both. Neither spoke of it, but as they faced the flash of cameras later that week, the city watching them stand side by side, both knew that the story between them had only just begun. The first press conference was chaos. Reporters leaned forward like predators' microphones, bristling in the air as Ethan Blackwell, immaculate in a tailored Navy suit, introduced the new Blackwell Hart Scholarship Initiative. Beside him stood Olivia Hart, her modest blazer and calm poise, a stark contrast to his commanding presence. The cameras loved the pairing, the ruthless billionaire and the idealistic teacher. Olivia despised the circus of flashing bulbs, but she kept her shoulders straight, answering questions with sincerity while Ethan parried with calculated precision. When one journalist asked why a man known for Wall Street aggression suddenly cared about children's education, Ethan's gaze slid briefly to Olivia before he replied smoothly, "Because sometimes the best investments are not in markets, but in people." The words sounded rehearsed, but Olivia caught the flicker of something unguarded in his eyes. Their partnership was born not of choice, but of necessity. Ethan needed to soften his image. Olivia needed resources for her students, and together they became a story the media devoured. Yet behind the glossy headlines, the contrast between their worlds only deepened. Olivia's days began at dawn in the Bronx, where the heating pipes clanked and the walls bore graffiti that no budget could erase. She taught reading comprehension to kids who had never owned a book, patched up playground bruises with dollar store bandages, and stretched every cent of her paycheck until it screamed. Ethan's days began with a chauffeured ride to a gleaming skyscraper where assistants delivered triple-checked reports and analysts waited for his decisions that could shift global markets. He ended his nights in a penthouse so high above the city it seemed untouched by its struggles. When they visited schools together, Olivia noticed how out of place he seemed among children. He stood rigid, hands in pockets, as if afraid of breaking something fragile. Once in a classroom where paint peeled from the ceiling, Olivia crouched beside a little girl to admire her drawing of a sunflower. Ethan lingered near the doorway until the girl shyly tugged at his sleeve. "Would you like to see mine, mister?" For a moment he hesitated. Then, to Olivia's surprise, he knelt awkwardly, his $1,000 suit brushing the scuffed floor, and listened as the girl explained her picture. The sight softened something in Olivia, though she quickly masked it with her usual guarded resolve. Their private interactions were less tender. In boardrooms, Olivia confronted him bluntly about his detachment. Money cannot buy respect from kids, she told him. After one visit, her tone edged with frustration. You cannot just throw checks at problems and expect them to disappear. Ethan raised a brow, amused by her fire. "And what do you suggest, Miss Hart? That I sit cross-legged on the floor and color with crayons?" She crossed her arms. Maybe start by listening instead of calculating. His laugh was quiet, genuine, and startlingly warm, and Olivia hated the way it stirred her chest. Still, she pressed on, challenging him at every turn, refusing to let him hide behind numbers. For the first time in years, someone spoke to Ethan without fear or deference, and against his own instincts, he found himself looking forward to those clashes. The more time they spent together, the more their differences became a mirror. Olivia refused to be dazzled by his wealth. When he offered to replace her school's entire library with the latest technology, she shook her head. "Books first," she said firmly. "Children need to touch pages, not screens." He could have forced the issue. Instead, he conceded, half smiling. "You are infuriating, Miss Hart, and you are arrogant, Mr. Blackwell." Yet beneath the barbs lay a strange respect, unspoken but undeniable. Olivia never forgot why she endured this uneasy alliance. Each check signed by Ethan meant more scholarships, more supplies, more opportunities for children who had been ignored. And Ethan, though he told himself this was only strategy, found himself lingering in classrooms longer than necessary, asking questions he never thought to ask before. One evening, after a long day of site visits, Olivia found herself carrying a heavy box of donated books up the steps of her school. Her arms ached, and she nearly stumbled when suddenly the weight lifted. Ethan stood beside her, sleeves rolled up, carrying the box with ease. "You could have called for help," he said. "You could have sent an assistant," she retorted. His mouth curved into a smirk. Touché. That small moment, ordinary yet intimate, lingered with her through the night. For Ethan, it was a revelation. He had spent years surrounded by people who bowed to his power, who flattered and feared him. Olivia did neither. She met him as an equal sometimes, as an adversary always, as someone who refused to bend. And that difference was what unsettled him most. But the partnership was not without storms. Reeves Carter, Ethan's rival in the corporate world, seized every opportunity to undermine them. In glossy magazines and financial columns, Reeves sneered that Ethan's charity was nothing more than a ploy, and that Olivia Hart was a pawn in his game. The press lapped it up. Olivia found herself hounded by paparazzi, outside her school, cameras shoved in her face as she tried to usher children safely inside. Parents grew nervous, teachers whispered. Her principal suggested a leave of absence to shield the school from the spotlight. Olivia refused. "I will not abandon my students because men like Reeves want a headline." But later, in the privacy of her apartment, she sat at her kitchen table with her head in her hands, feeling the weight of battles she never asked to fight. Ethan learned of the harassment from his communications team and reacted with cold fury. He summoned lawyers, threatened lawsuits, tightened security around Olivia without her consent. When she discovered bodyguards trailing her to the grocery store, she confronted him, anger blazing. "You do not get to control my life. I am not another acquisition." His jaw tightened. "I am trying to protect you." She met his gaze, unwavering. "Then try listening to what I need, not dictating what you think I should have." The silence that followed was heavy charged, and for the first time, Ethan felt the sting of being powerless. Olivia was not like anyone he had ever known. She could not be bought, silenced, or controlled. And though it infuriated him, it also drew him closer, like a flame he could not resist. Their partnership, forged in necessity, was becoming something else entirely, something dangerous and undeniable. The night after their fiercest argument, Olivia stayed late at school, organizing stacks of papers beneath the dim flicker of fluorescent lights. She rubbed her temples' exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders when a soft knock echoed from the door. She looked up and froze. Ethan Blackwell leaned casually against the frame. His tie loosened his usually polished hair slightly out of place, as though he had come straight from a meeting without stopping to correct his appearance. "What are you doing here?" she asked warily, still smarting from their last clash. He stepped inside, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you could use this?" he said, placing one on her desk. Olivia hesitated before taking it, surprised that he knew her order exactly right. 2 creams, no sugar. "How did you know?" "You mutter it every time we stop for coffee before a press event," he said with a faint smile. "I pay attention." The simple admission unsettled her. She tried to bury the warmth spreading in her chest by focusing on her work. Yet as he helped her sort through boxes of books, the silence between them shifted. It was not heavy this time, but companionable. At one point she reached for a stack, at the same moment he did, and their hands brushed. A spark shot through her, undeniable, and when she glanced up, she found his gaze lingering on hers, softer than she had ever seen it. The moment stretched until she pulled her hand back, her voice unsteady. "Thank you for the coffee." "You are welcome," he replied, though his tone carried more weight than the words suggested. Days later, at a press conference, Olivia struggled with a faulty microphone. She fiddled with the stand, trying to hide her flustered expression as the crowd waited impatiently. Ethan stepped forward without a word, adjusted the mic with practiced ease, then leaned slightly toward her. "Speak now, Miss Hart." He murmured his voice just low enough for her to hear. His proximity sent a shiver down her spine, and when she glanced up, their eyes met for a fleeting second that seemed to echo far longer than it should have. The cameras captured the moment, though neither of them realized it at the time. Later tabloids buzzed with speculation, the ice-hearted billionaire and the fiery teacher. Olivia tried to dismiss it as nonsense, but the memory of his steady hands and the rare warmth in his smile refused to fade. Another afternoon brought them together again in a quieter setting. Olivia was carrying a heavy box of donated supplies when her grip slipped and the contents spilled across the sidewalk. Before she could kneel, Ethan was already there gathering books with surprising care. "You could have waited for help," he teased lightly. "You could have ignored me," she shot back half amused despite herself. His lips curved into something that was almost a laugh. "And miss the chance to prove I am not entirely useless." The banter flowed more easily than she expected, and for once she let herself smile openly. She realized in that moment that Ethan's laughter was rare, genuine, and startlingly human. It unsettled her more than his wealth ever could. Their bond grew through countless small encounters. Olivia noticed how he lingered longer at schools, asking questions not about numbers, but about children's lives. She saw him pause when a student showed him a drawing, saw him listen when a teacher spoke of overcrowded classrooms, and he in turn noticed how she never once tried to impress him, never softened her opinions to please him, never treated him as anything but another flawed human being. One evening after a long day of community visits, Olivia admitted, "I am not impressed by your money, Mr. Blackwell." Ethan looked at her for a long moment, before a genuine laugh broke free. It was the first time in years that he had laughed without calculation, and the sound startled even him. "You are impossible," he said, but his voice carried an unfamiliar warmth. "And you are insufferable," she countered, though her lips curved into the faintest of smiles. Their relationship remained undefined, yet something undeniable had begun to bloom. Ethan found himself thinking of her during long nights in his penthouse, wondering what she was doing in her modest apartment, whether she was grading papers or reading by lamplight. Olivia caught herself remembering his rare smile when she should have been focusing on lesson plans. Both denied it aloud, but both felt it deeply, the first stirrings of a connection neither had sought but both could no longer ignore. It was not a whirlwind romance born of fantasy, but a slow, quiet unraveling of walls built too high for too long. For Ethan, it was rediscovering the humanity he had buried beneath profit margins. For Olivia, it was confronting the truth that even in a world she despised for its greed, one man could surprise her. And though neither admitted it, yet their hearts had already begun to shift, colliding in ways that would soon change everything. The fragile balance between Olivia and Ethan did not last untouched. Their growing partnership and undeniable chemistry became the perfect target for Ethan's rival, Reeves Carter, a smooth-talking CEO with a reputation for cutthroat ambition. Reeves had always resented Ethan's dominance on Wall Street, but now he saw a new opening. In interviews, he smirked as he hinted that Ethan's sudden interest in philanthropy was nothing but a strategic ploy. And when photos of Ethan and Olivia began circulating in tabloids, captured moments of their hands brushing of Ethan leaning close during a press conference, Reeves pounced. He fed stories to gossip columns suggesting Olivia was not a teacher at all, but an opportunist who had seduced a billionaire to gain fame. Overnight, Olivia's world turned upside down. Paparazzi lurked outside, her school cameras flashing as children arrived, their faces caught in unwanted photographs. Parents grew uneasy, worried that their children's names might end up splashed across tabloids. Fellow teachers whispered in the hallways, some sympathetic, others skeptical. The principal called Olivia into her office, her tone apologetic but firm. "Perhaps it would be best if you took a temporary leave of absence just until the attention dies down." Olivia's heart clenched. Teaching was not just her job, it was her life, her purpose. But the sight of frightened students shielding their eyes from camera lenses made the decision clear. She agreed to step back, though it felt like surrender. Ethan was furious when he learned. He stormed into her apartment one evening, his suit jacket tossed carelessly over a chair as he paced her tiny living room. "This is absurd," he snapped. "Reeves is dragging your name through the mud, and you are the one paying the price." Olivia sat quietly on the worn couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "The children come first," she said softly. "They do not deserve to be hounded because of me. That is not strength, Olivia. That is martyrdom," Ethan shot back. She lifted her chin, her voice steady. "Do not confuse self-sacrifice with weakness. I am not like the women you are used to, Ethan. I do not need you to fight my battles." For a moment, the room was charged with silence. Then, with a long exhale, Ethan sat beside her, his anger giving way to something raw. "I know," he admitted. "That is what terrifies me." Olivia found work outside the classroom, tutoring children at a community center that operated without the politics of school boards or the glare of the press. She created lessons with donated supplies, teaching by the light of flickering lamps. proving to herself and to anyone watching that her commitment was unshakable. The scandal might have cost her a position, but it would never silence her passion. Ethan watched from the sidelines, torn between rage at Reeves and admiration for Olivia's resilience. He increased security around her, though she bristled at the intrusion. He used his legal team to counter every false headline, though the damage to her reputation could not be erased overnight. And still he returned to that community center, slipping into the back during her evening sessions, watching as she stood before a group of wide-eyed children, her voice steady, her smile unwavering. He saw the way they looked at her with trust and hope, and he realized he had never inspired anyone in such a way. One night after she dismissed her students, he approached. "You should not be here," she told him, her eyes wary. "Reporters will follow you." "Then let them," Ethan replied. "Let them see the truth instead of Reeves's lies." She shook her head, her voice tinged with both exhaustion and defiance. "My truth does not need a billionaire to validate it." Ethan stepped closer, his voice low. "Maybe not, but it deserves to be defended." For a long moment, their eyes locked the air between them, charged with unspoken emotion. Olivia broke the silence first, gathering her papers and stuffing them into her worn satchel. "I cannot stop you from fighting your battles, Ethan, but I will fight mine my way." And with that she left, leaving him, standing in the quiet classroom with the weight of her words echoing in his chest. Outside, forces pressed harder. Reeves continued his smear campaign, and the press fed hungrily on every rumor. Ethan's board grew restless, warning that his reputation was at risk. He faced pressure to sever ties with Olivia, to let her weather the storm alone. But Ethan, for the first time in his career, refused to bend. Instead of cutting her off, he doubled down, appearing publicly at the community center, making donations in her name, forcing the world to see that he stood beside her. Olivia hated the spectacle, hated being painted as a pawn in corporate warfare, but she could not ignore the way he looked at her when the cameras faded, as though she was the only anchor keeping him from unraveling. Their trials were not only public, but deeply personal. Olivia wrestled with the fear that her presence in Ethan's life was harming him, tarnishing his carefully built empire. Ethan wrestled with the realization that for once he cared less about empire and more about a single woman's opinion. They clashed, they argued, they pulled away, and returned again, each confrontation peeling back. Layers they had spent years building. Through it all, the attraction between them deepened, undeniable, dangerous, and utterly real. The storm of scandal left both of them raw, their tempers short, and their emotions stretched thin. Ethan sensed Olivia's exhaustion, and in a rare gesture of vulnerability, invited her to leave the city with him for a few days. At first, she refused. Her life revolved around her students, and she hated the idea of appearing as though she was running away. But when paparazzi camped outside her apartment for the third night in a row, flashing bulbs through her curtains, she finally agreed. Ethan whisked her away, not by private jet, but by car, a quiet drive up the coast, where the skyscrapers of Manhattan gave way to winding roads lined with autumn trees. Olivia sat in the passenger seat, arms crossed, gaze fixed out the window. She did not speak for nearly an hour. Ethan did not press her. Instead, he let the silence fill with the sound of the engine and the rush of ocean air. When they finally arrived at his seaside estate, a sprawling yet surprisingly understated home. Perched above rocky cliffs, Olivia's breath caught. It was beautiful, but not ostentatious. Whitewashed walls, wide windows, framing endless sea, and a porch that smelled faintly of salt and cedar. "This is not what I expected," she admitted softly. Ethan arched a brow. "You expected marble floors and gold ceilings." She gave him a small, reluctant smile. "Something like that." He shrugged. "This was my father's place. The only property I never turned into an investment. For a man who measured everything in returns, the confession was startling." Olivia followed him inside, where Mrs. Hernandez, his longtime housekeeper, greeted them warmly. The scent of fresh bread filled the kitchen, and for the first time in weeks, Olivia felt herself exhale. That evening, as the sun sank into the horizon and painted the sky with fire, they sat on the porch wrapped in blankets, the ocean roaring below. Olivia sipped tea, while Ethan nursed a glass of scotch, the silence between them gentler now. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft. "I lost my parents when I was 18. A car accident. One moment they were there, the next. Gone." She swallowed hard. "College should have been exciting, but I was drowning in grief. Teaching saved me. It gave me a reason to get out of bed, to fight for something bigger than myself." Ethan listened, his expression unreadable, though his eyes softened. After a long pause, he said, "I was engaged once, 5 years ago. Elizabeth." She liked the idea of being with a billionaire, not the reality. "The hours, the scrutiny, the cold edges I built around myself." She left. His tone was matter of fact, but Olivia heard the ache beneath it. "I told myself I did not need anyone after that. That caring was weakness, but watching you stand there that night at the gala, refusing to bend it, unsettled me." Olivia's throat tightened. She had not expected honesty from him, not like this. The wind whipped around them, carrying away her hesitation. "You see," she said quietly, "I am not like other women. I do not care about your empire or your image. I care about children who cannot afford notebooks. I care about fairness, about honesty." Ethan's gaze held hers, intense and unwavering. "That is exactly why I want you." The words hung between them, no longer a spectacle for cameras, but a truth stripped bare. Slowly, almost hesitantly, he reached for her hand beneath the blanket. She did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined, tentative but sure. The ocean roared, the sky deepened into indigo, and the world seemed to narrow to the space between them. When Ethan leaned in, his kiss was not demanding, but questioning, as though asking permission to break the walls they had built. Olivia answered by closing the distance, her hand rising to rest against his cheek. The kiss was gentle at first, then deeper, fueled by weeks of tension and denial. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, their foreheads pressed together. "I should not be here," Olivia whispered. "This is reckless." "Perhaps," Ethan murmured, "but it is real." That night they did not cross lines of propriety, but they lingered close, talking until dawn. They shared stories of childhood, of fears and ambitions, of the scars that shaped them. Olivia confessed her worry that she was losing herself in the glare of Ethan's world. Ethan admitted he feared that without her, he would never learn how to be more than a machine. For once, neither tried to win, neither tried to control. They simply were. The days that followed unfolded like stolen time. They walked along the beach, Olivia laughing as waves soaked her shoes while Ethan carried them back to the porch. They cooked dinner together, under Mrs. Hernandez's amused eye, Olivia chopping vegetables, while Ethan clumsily attempted to follow her instructions. At night, They sat by the fire, their conversations drifting into silences that felt comfortable rather than strained. Yet even in that fragile bubble reality loomed. Olivia knew the scandal still brewed in the city, knew Reeves had not stopped his campaign. Ethan knew his board was restless, that shareholders whispered of weakness. But in those stolen days by the sea, they let themselves believe, if only briefly, that love could grow between two people from different worlds. On their last evening, Olivia stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping her hair around her face. Ethan joined her, his hand brushing hers. "What happens when we go back?" she asked softly. "The storm will be waiting." He studied her, his jaw tightening. "Then let us face it together." She turned to him, her eyes searching. "And if it destroys us both?" "Then at least we will know we did not run from it," he replied. She wanted to argue, wanted to insist she was strong enough to fight alone. But the sincerity in his voice silenced her. Instead, she whispered, "Just promise me one thing, anything. Promise me that when it gets hard, you will not shut me out. You will not retreat into your fortress of glass." His gaze was steady, his grip firm around her hand. "I promise." The ocean crashed below, the stars emerged above, and Olivia allowed herself to believe, just for that moment, that his promise could hold. The peace of the seaside faded the instant they returned to New York. The scandal had not cooled, but had instead exploded. Tabloids splashed headlines across every cover. Teacher turns billionaire's head charity or affair, and Olivia heart savior or social climber. Paparazzi followed her every step, reporters shouted invasive questions, and internet commentators dissected her every expression. For Olivia, it was unbearable. She withdrew to her apartment curtains, drawn her phone buzzing with messages she could not bear to read. At the same time, Ethan faced a firestorm of his own. Reeves Carter had orchestrated a media assault, releasing doctored photos and emails that implied Olivia had been planted in Ethan's life by his rivals to manipulate him. Though the evidence was fabricated, it spread like wildfire, and Ethan's board demanded answers. In the middle of the chaos, Olivia called Ethan to meet her at the community center late one night. When he arrived, she was pacing the empty hall, her eyes red from sleepless nights. "I cannot do this anymore," she said the moment she saw him. Ethan froze. "Do what?" This she gestured wildly, her voice cracking. "Being paraded in front of cameras, being painted as some manipulative woman who wants your money. My students are scared, my reputation is ruined, and all because I stood next to you. You cannot walk away now," he said sharply. "That is exactly what Reeves wants." Her chin lifted. Maybe Reeves is right. Maybe this was all a mistake. His chest tightened. "Do you really believe that?" She hesitated, her voice trembling. "I believe you will survive this without me. I am not sure I will survive it with you." Silence pressed heavy, between them broken only by the hum of distant traffic. Ethan stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Olivia, you told me once you are not like other women. And you are not. You are stronger, braver, more relentless than anyone I have ever known. That is why I want you. That is why I love you." The word hung in the air, raw and unpolished. Olivia's breath caught. Love. She wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. "Love cannot erase what the world is saying. Love cannot protect my students." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Then let me protect you in the only way I can." The next morning, against the advice of every public relations expert on his payroll, Ethan called a press conference. Cameras crowded the marble lobby of Blackwell Capitol, reporters shouting questions as he stepped to the podium. Olivia stood off to the side, uncertain, torn between fear and the faint flicker of hope. Ethan's voice was steady, commanding, carrying across the room. "You have all speculated about Miss Hart. You have called her names, doubted her motives, questioned her integrity. Enough. She is not a pawn, she is not a scandal, and she is not like other women. She is the woman who stood up in a room full of billionaires and told the truth. She is the woman who fights for children no one else sees. And that is exactly why I love her." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Flashes exploded like fireworks and questions flew from every direction. Ethan ignored them all. His gaze found Olivia's across the room, steady and unwavering, as though she was the only person who mattered. The declaration reverberated across the city within hours. Social media exploded, talk shows dissected every word, and opinion pieces debated whether Ethan Blackwell had finally revealed a human heart or orchestrated the greatest PR move of his career. For Olivia, the world spun too fast. Strangers cheered her on in the streets. Others hurled insults online, and her name became a trending topic she wished she could escape. That night she confronted Ethan again, her voice shaking. "Do you realize what you have done? You painted a target on me even bigger than before." He stepped closer, his expression unyielding. "No, I put the target on myself. Reeves wanted to make you the story. I made it mine." Her anger wavered, replaced by something dangerously close to longing. "And what happens if this destroys everything you built? Then let it," Ethan said without hesitation. "I have built empires before. I can build them again, but I will not find another you." Olivia turned away, her eyes burning. He made it sound so simple, yet the weight of his words pressed down on her. She wanted to believe him, wanted to surrender, but she feared what belief would cost. Meanwhile, Reeves raged at Ethan's audacity. He doubled his attacks, leaking confidential documents and spinning financial rumors to shake Blackwell Capital. Stocks dipped, headlines blared, and for a moment it seemed Reeves might succeed. Ethan worked around the clock, marshalling his allies, tightening his defenses. But through it all, he carried Olivia's face in his mind, the echo of her voice, reminding him why this battle mattered more than any deal he had ever fought. The climax was not only about money or reputation, but about trust. Olivia stood at the center of the storm, questioning whether Ethan's love was real or another performance. Ethan stood against his rival, risking everything not just to win, but to prove that for once in his life, he cared about something greater than profit. And as the city held its breath, waiting to see who would fall, both Olivia and Ethan realized that their hearts, once guarded and unwilling, had already chosen. The only question left was whether the world would allow them to stand together. The storm reached its breaking point when Ethan summoned his legal team and launched a counterattack against Reeves. Weeks of investigation had uncovered forged documents, manipulated media files, and secret payments to journalists. Ethan presented the evidence to regulators and the press in one decisive move that shook the financial world. Overnight, Reeves went from predator to prey. His empire collapsed under the weight of scrutiny. His investors fled, and his name became synonymous with fraud. For Ethan, it was vindication. For Olivia, it was relief, though the scars of public judgment lingered. She had walked through fire and somehow emerged stronger. The press, once eager to tear her down, began to rewrite her story. Articles praised her dedication to children, Features showcased her work at the community center, and parents who had once been wary now sought her guidance. One morning, Olivia returned to her old school to find her students waiting with handmade signs that read, "Welcome back, Miss Hart." Tears stung her eyes as they crowded around her, hugging her tightly, proof that no tabloid could ever define her. Ethan watched from the sidelines, unseen by most, his chest tightening with pride. Later that evening, he invited her to the Blackwell Foundation's gala, a very different stage from the one where their story had begun. Olivia hesitated. The last time she had stood in such a ballroom, she had been humiliated. But Ethan promised it would be different. "Trust me," he said simply. She agreed, though nerves gnawed at her. When the night arrived, she wore a simple emerald dress that caught the light with every step. The room fell silent as she entered, memories of that first confrontation rippling through the crowd. Ethan took her hand and led her to the stage, his voice steady as he addressed the audience. "Tonight, we are not here to celebrate wealth. We are here to celebrate possibility." He turned to Olivia, his gaze holding hers as if no one else existed. "This woman reminded me that money means nothing if it does not serve others. She reminded me that love is not weakness, but strength." Before hundreds of witnesses, Ethan lowered himself to one knee, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. Gasps filled the hall as he opened it, revealing a ring that gleamed beneath the chandelier. "Olivia Hart," he said, "I once told you that you are not like other women. That has never been more true. You are the woman who changed me, who showed me purpose beyond profit, who made me believe in love again. Will you marry me?" The room seemed to vanish around her, the cameras, the whispers, the glittering lights. All she saw was him, kneeling with sincerity written in every line of his face. Her heart pounded, her throat tightened, and then her answer came clear and unwavering. "Yes." Applause erupted, flashes blinded, but Olivia heard none of it. Ethan rose, slipped the ring onto her finger, and kissed her hand with a tenderness that made her forget the chaos of the past months. In that moment, everything else faded, the scandals, the battles, the doubts. What remained was the truth they had both fought to deny. They were stronger together. Afterward, as the gala dissolved into celebration, Olivia pulled Ethan aside, her voice low. "This cannot just be about us. If we do this, if we marry, then it has to mean something bigger." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm. "Then let us build something together, not just a marriage, a foundation, a promise, a future." They announced that night the creation of the Blackwell Hart Foundation, dedicated to scholarships, community centers, and opportunities for underprivileged children. For Olivia, it was the realization of a dream. For Ethan, it was the beginning of a legacy far greater than wealth. Hand in hand, they faced the crowd, no longer adversaries from different worlds, but partners united by love, conviction, and the belief that change was possible. 5 years later, the Blackwell Hart Foundation had become a beacon across the country. What began as a single scholarship fund grew into a nationwide network of programs that provided computers to classrooms, built libraries in underserved communities, and offered mentorship to students who once believed college was impossible. Olivia stood at the podium of a new learning center in the Bronx, her voice clear as she welcomed children to a place built from the vision she had carried for years. Behind her sat Ethan, no longer the cold Wall Street shark, but a man transformed, his reputation rebuilt as a leader who valued more than profit. The press no longer called him ruthless, they called him human. Their marriage had not erased challenges, but together they had weathered them with the same resolve that carried them through their first storm. In their Manhattan townhouse, laughter echoed often, especially from their 2 young children, who filled the once silent halls with joy. Ethan, once uncomfortable around children, now knelt easily on the floor to build towers of blocks or read bedtime stories. Olivia, who once feared being overshadowed by his wealth, discovered that her strength only grew beside him. They were equals, each grounding the other, each refusing to let the past define their future. On the morning of their anniversary, Ethan surprised her by leading her to a quiet garden tucked behind the foundation's headquarters. Lanterns swayed gently in the breeze, and at the center stood a plaque inscribed with words that made her chest tighten. She said, "I am not like other women." He said, "That is why I will always want you." Tears blurred Olivia's vision as Ethan took her hand. "This was never about proving anything to the world," he said softly. "It was about proving it to us." She smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with the same fierce love that had carried them from that first shocking encounter to this moment of peace. Later that evening, as their children played nearby and the city lights glimmered against the skyline, Olivia leaned against Ethan's shoulder. "Do you ever think about that night?" she asked. "The gala, the chaos, the way it all began." Ethan chuckled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Every day, it was the moment my life turned upside down." "And right side up," Olivia added with a laugh. He pulled her closer, his voice warm. "I built empires before, but none of them meant anything until you." She looked up at him, her smile tender. "And I fought for children every day, but I never believed I could fight for myself. Until you stood beside me." They shared a quiet kiss beneath the stars, the city humming around them, their lives forever entwined, not by wealth or circumstance, but by choice. Years later, when their daughter asked how they met, Olivia told her the story with a smile. "I stood in a room full of people who doubted me, and your father said something that changed everything." "What did he say?" the little girl asked, eyes wide. Olivia glanced at Ethan, whose smile carried the same spark it had 5 years earlier. "He said, 'That is why I want you,' and he has never stopped proving it." The girl giggled and ran off to play, leaving her parents to share a knowing look. Olivia and Ethan had built a legacy, not of money, but of meaning, a life defined not by scandal, but by love. And as the night deepened, they knew with absolute certainty that the story that began with shock had become one of devotion, resilience, and a love strong enough to outlast every storm.